Good morning, everyone. My name is Andile Khumalo, your proud host for the 10-part webinar series, Survive and Thrive, brought to you by the Allan Umbrella Retirement Fund. I hope you are all well on this Friday morning. The sun seems to be out in most parts of South Africa, but wherever you are in the world, you are most welcome. Now, as investment managers and administrators of retirement funds, the good folks at Allan have been witnessing the final impact, or rather the financial impact of the pandemic on so many businesses. They are now focused on keeping your investment safe, but also providing you with access to informative business content to help you guide through this very difficult time. Now, with so many small and medium-sized businesses under severe threat of closure, as a result, of course, of the lockdown restrictions, notwithstanding that some of them have been starting to relax in recent weeks, you may be asking yourselves a few questions, paramount amongst which may be, what measures can I adopt to make sure that my business survives and thrives during COVID-19 and beyond? Now, with the help of industry experts and senior business leaders, this webinar series will present a blueprint of strategies that you and I can adopt to boost our business's longevity and help reach its full potential. Welcome to the first installment. Today, we're going to be focusing on a very important part of trying to build a business, and that is strategy. The title of our webinar is Fight or Flight, Deciding on the Next Steps of Your Business. And the guests that are featured on the webinar is independent strategy specialist Tony Manning, and also the Sun International Group's Chief Executive, a man who's been very busy this week, Mr. Anthony Leeming. And they are joining us now on the screens. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, as well. Just to get through some housekeeping rules, if you do experience any technical difficulties during this webinar, please go to the Zoom help. There is a button that can help you with whatever issues you might have that can help you troubleshoot. The other thing that obviously does work relatively well, the technical people will tell us why that is, it typically does, and that is to essentially restart. So get out of the webinar and try to get back in. That typically works out as well. If you do want to submit any questions to our panelists, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A little icon. You press on that one, you type your question, you click send, and we will get through all the questions that you have. And we'll try, of course, to get through as many as we possibly can. Many of you have also been sending questions at registration. We have all of your questions, and we're going to try and make sure that we swindle those in to the many questions we already have for our guests to help us around this strategy question of running your own business. Anything we can't cover in the session, we'll endeavor to get those answers for you from the speakers via email. And when you registered, of course, you got your email addresses. We're going to try and close the customer experience loop by sending you responses via emails on that one. You will also be getting a link with the recording of today's conversation after this session. Please feel free to share that far and wide. There very well be many people who couldn't join us this morning, and that you think, having heard the session yourself, you think they might benefit from the content. We encourage you to share that link as much as you can. We will also host the recordings and other useful content on a website that will be dedicated to this 10-part series. Also, for those that are looking for CPD points, unfortunately, this webinar does not get you any CPD points, just so that you know that. But that, of course, there's many others, I'm sure, where you can get that kind of stuff from. Just to be clear, this one does not give you CPD points. Right, before I go to my guests, we have a bit of well, not just one, but actually we've got a couple of interesting things. We're going to have some polls later on as we go through the session. In fact, we've got two that are prepared for you, so look out for those and make sure you participate and you pick the right answers that at least apply to you. The other exciting thing we've got going, we've got a lady by the name of Lita Curry. She's from a company called 3 Stick Men. Yes, the 3 Stick Men. It's exactly what it sounds like. What she will be doing is she'll be doing graphic recording of our session this morning. And then what that means essentially is that she'll be capturing the key discussion points in a combination of words and pictures. She'll then create a little graphic that she will share with us right at the end of the session. And the powers that be have told me that I can promise you that you will get that image for yourself as well, as a bit of a, call it an image recording of the session that you participated in. So look out for that as well later on. Right, now moving on to my guests. First up, I feel like saying in the red corner and the blue corner. In the blue corner, Tony Manning. He's an independent strategy specialist since 1987, 20 years of experience in business, mainly in the media, advertising, and marketing space, including having been chairman and CEO of McCann Erickson, and also head of marketing for Coca-Cola, Southern and Central Africa. He's written 13 books on management. Yes, 13 of those books. And of course, because he's a world-renowned author, he's written many, many articles. He speaks quite often on issues around management and strategy, and also lectures on the senior executive programs at various universities and business schools. Welcome, Mr. Manning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're loving your background. You're looking very studious, but then again, I guess a man who's written 13 books should have a background like that. Next up is Anthony Leeming. I've already been saying that he's been a busy man because we obviously planned this webinar a while ago. And then, of course, in the week leading up to today, lots of news, lots of announcements of the business update they put out 2 days ago. And of course, lots of rumors of takeovers. He's there to respond to all of that. So I'm sure we're going to get into some of those details later on because it's all happening at this difficult time and he can share some lessons as well. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Sun International Group. He's been in the role for the past 3 years, having started out as a group financial manager back in 1999, then became CFO, that's Chief Financial Officer, in 2013, a fellow bean counter like myself, but now also, of course, Chief Executive of one of the largest gaming, hoteling, and just general hospitality groups in South Africa and the world. We know they've got operations around the country, but also in Latin America, which I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to touch on. Gentlemen, you are most welcome. Thank you very much for sharing your Friday mornings with us. I think we should get straight into it. And Anthony, let me start with you because you have been grabbing the headlines somewhat this week. In many ways, we're quite fortunate that we are talking this morning with those news being out in the market. So hopefully, you feel more calmer to share all sorts of information without fear of sharing anything that's insider because everything is now out in the open. How would you characterize the last few months for you and the Sun International business with all that's gone on? You guys in the tourism sector that rely on the tourism sector, you're in the belly of this fire. I'm pretty sure you're kind of the front line of the troops of trying to fight the impact of COVID. How has it been and what are some of the things you've had to deal with?
Yeah, morning Andile and morning Tony and your participants. It's been a crazy few months. I mean, on the day we announced a 91% increase in earnings, really getting debt under control, we spent the last 3 years really trying to get the business right. And we had turned a corner and announced the lockdown. So everything changed from thinking long-term to thinking, well, what are we going to do? Putting in restrictions, managing to still operate, and then preparing for close down. First day of lockdown, you sat at home thinking, what am I going to do? Turn on Netflix. But very soon thereafter, when the lockdown extended and things started happening, there was a lot of communication to staff, informing what's going on, trying to keep everyone updated. The lockdown was extended. And then it turned into a period of realizing that, well, hang on, we're not going to be open for 2, 3, 4 months. And it became a lobbying strategy. It's talking to government, putting protocols in place, extensive lobbying, whether it's COCTA, DTI, tourism industry, a lot of forums, the gaming industry, casino, our regulators. And it was really a chaotic 2 or 3 week period. Once that had sort of died down in a sense, it really became what's next. And we had to look at the business and say, well, we've got to deal with this. We've got to come out stronger. And we started working on saying, well, how can we come out a better company? So a lot of the focus shifted from just sort of dealing with health and safety, dealing with lobbying, and then really pushing very hard to make sure we come out of this as a stronger company because it's not going to be business as usual. It's going to be very different. So we did extensive sort of deep dives into cost structures, deep dive into structures, assessing the customer service, assessing our marketing strategy, our MVG program, and really trying to be a better company. I think you can't waste this time. It's been some great work's been done. We got another 3 hard years. If I look back, as I said, we've spent 3 years reducing our debt levels, strengthening our balance sheet, and really getting the business into a position where you can grow and move forward. And we're going to start again. So, having said that, we've got to rebalance the ship, deal with banks. So liquidity became a major issue. Having to deal with banks, inform shareholders. We had a shareholder update just last week. So everything's been very chaotic, and from normally long-term decisions, medium-term decisions, everything's about tomorrow. And the decision you made yesterday, the following week is irrelevant, and you've got to make another decision. So a lot of things you had to do. As I say, we've had a lot of updates with our staff, video messages, calls with your top 300 regular. I think the most important thing was to keep people updated. Everyone's insecure, everyone's upset. We had a lot of messages from staff. Some people have been very upset with us because we reduced salaries to 40%. Others have been very understanding, very supportive. I think as it's gone on longer, people have realized the seriousness of it. And I think, as a group, we really are trying to look after our people. And the only way you can do that is balancing the liquidity with trying to look after your people. So, you can't have one without the other. If you don't have liquidity, it's very difficult to look after your people. So managing that, trying to make sure you can look after as many as possible, making sure the business is sustainable for the medium and longer term is absolutely critical. If you don't get that right, you will have a bloodbath far bigger than what we're going to have to survive in the longer term.
Talking about surviving in the longer term, Anthony, how do you deal with the uncertainty? How do you deal with the unknowns? How do you deal with the fact that, we literally every other day, every other week, we're getting more and more information we didn't have the previous day or the previous week. But, there is no crystal ball with this because so much of it is so new. How do you plan for the long term when it kind of feels a little overwhelming in that you don't have all the information? It's just the nature of the beast.
Look, you can only deal with information that's in front of you. I mean, you can't guess. You can obviously think about the future, think about what's going to change, how it will be. And then every day when something's different or something tells you that's not right, you got to change. So it's a matter of being adapting, making sure you're making the right decisions for what information that is in front of you. And always, like I say, keeping people informed, keeping the discussions going, keeping people engaged, and really actually assessing everything, because you can't make long-term decisions right now. You can make decisions for the sort of medium term so that you're ready to operate. And if things change, you've got to be ready to make another decision. So it's really been about that. It's not about a long-term scenario now. It's about the medium term, a 1-year outlook, and saying, okay, we need to be strong in a year's time. How do we get through this period? And predicting sort of on different scenarios. We've done 30, 60, 90% scenarios. What will it mean at 30? What does it mean at 60? What does it mean at 90? And how do we take that forward? So you've got various scenarios and various plans have been put in place. We have been informing staff monthly what next month's remuneration is going to be, because we just don't know. The tour's benefits have been a nightmare to try and claim. So you're trying to tell staff, give them some sort of security, but you don't know. So we kind of mid-month almost informing staff of next month. And obviously dealing with bankers and then shareholders. As you see, we've announced the rights issue. We got a very solid business. So the biggest issue for us is liquidity in the short term, not the ability to survive in the long term, in my view. So I think our business, money spent, we've got big properties in the ground. Ultimately, you can squeeze capex for a while, you'll generate the cash flow, not as much as years before, but slowly you'll rebuild. And that's the basis of really trying to survive the long term and deal with the short term.
All right, Tony, let me come to you. A man with 30 years experience in strategy consulting, you've dealt with the biggest companies around the world. When you look at the impact of the pandemic and you look at what it has done to businesses and their strategies, how should we as business leaders view it? What should be the impact? Is it a big impact? Is it a small impact? Am I tweaking strategy? Am I overhauling? Am I reimagining? What am I doing? Because I sometimes get the feeling that, if you don't act enough, people will blame you later. If you overhaul too much now, people, may still blame you later. How should I view this?
I think very seriously. We have absolutely no idea how serious this whole process is going to be. None at all. So what Anthony has described is a really very practical approach, basically the only approach that one can take to dealing with what is going on at the moment. We have every day new information coming in about the science, about how this thing is affecting people, about how it's affecting economies, how governments are adjusting to it and so on. So every day brings a huge wodge of new surprises onto our desks. And there is no long-term view that one can take with any certainty at all. It's going to, this is, some people at the start of the process, I heard some people saying, oh, we've seen this movie before. We'll get through it. Don't worry about a thing. We've seen this movie before. We've been here before. The fact is we haven't. this is a oncer. This has never happened before, an existential crisis like this on an absolutely global scale, in a globally connected world, where movement in one country affects other countries very, very rapidly. And you're seeing countries and states within countries having to adjust on a daily basis and adding confusion to the whole process. So the only way to deal with this is what we've just heard described, which is on a very short-term basis of making sure that the ship is going to get through the water today and having an eye on the future as well. Because the fact is, there will be winners and losers through this situation. Some companies will become absolutely obsessed with just bumbling along today and not thinking about that longer term future and what their actions today will cause to happen in that future. Others are going to look too far out into the future and not take the appropriate immediate action. So it's a balancing act. You know, there's that old sort of adage of strategy being about trying to fix the engines on a plane while you're in mid-flight. Well, that's exactly what we're sitting with at the moment, except the wheels are falling off and the tail fins are falling off and all the rest of it. So this is a really perplexing time, and it's a time for common sense and practical answers. The one thing we have to avoid at this time is being suckered by fads and by promises that I have an answer as to what's going to happen next, because the fact is nobody knows. So I've been watching scenarios on this thing and forecasts and so on for 3.5 months now, with lots and lots of people speaking with great confidence about how it would pan out and what kind of shape the recovery was going to be. And still nobody knows. Everybody is literally guessing. As Anthony said, one's got to try and avoid. One is in guessing mode entirely. So it's a really tough time, and strategy as usual, where people are talking, 3-year, 5-year plans with massive detail. I mean, I hear CEOs complaining that their boards are pressuring them for that kind of detail. It's absolutely ridiculous. Who on those boards has any sense of what's actually going to happen this afternoon at 3:00? Nobody is the answer. And so leadership at this time is really a critical factor in this whole process. And there's a little factor called grit, or courage, if you like, or perseverance, or resilience, whatever you choose to term it. But the willingness to keep on pushing forward, no matter what happens next, which is going to be of paramount importance and is going to separate winners from losers. No amount of strategy on its own will do it. If there's not that human spirit to drive this process, that gees to drive this process, and I don't want to get into a whole lot of woo-woo motivational stuff. That is not the point. But strong leadership now is absolutely essential. Gotcha. Because the leader sets the tone for the rest. Napoleon once said, a leader is a dealer in hope. But you've also, as Jack Welch used to say, got to look the future in the eye and deal with the reality that is, not the one you'd like to see. So you've got this balancing act. And that's what leadership is about at the moment. Right. So there's a great deal for companies to think about. They need to be very careful of not overloading themselves with a whole lot of tools and fads and wacky new ideas and so on, which promise the earth, but are not going to make an iota of difference to your business today.
So while we pull up the first poll for the day, I'd like you gentlemen to start thinking about sharing your own experiences and advice on the approach. So we have in our audience and as our guests on this webinar, people that run businesses. Some of them, they own themselves, and they're looking for a methodology. They're looking for a model. They're looking for an approach. They're looking for the ingredients. Anthony, from your experience, what you've had to do in your chair as CEO of a business that's in the belly of this crisis, what has worked for you? What can you share from your personal experience? Tony, your knowledge, your insights in strategy, all the work you've done over the years, how should I approach this? What should I think about? Is there a little model that I can use? What are the key tenets you can help me with? While you're thinking about that, let's put up our first poll, ladies and gentlemen, because we do want to get immediate feedback from you as we go. If the guys can put up the poll so that the guests are able to take the poll through. Now, the poll is this one, or at least, is asking you, how would you describe the current state of the business that you are in? How would you describe the current state of the business that you are in? Option number 1, business as usual, albeit with potentially lower revenue than before COVID-19. Option 2, undergoing restructuring, including retrenchments. Option 3, trying to pivot into other markets, business models, industries altogether. Or option 4, considering closing the business down. Please make your choices right now so that we can get the feedback from you. Please participate as much as possible. I'd love to see whether you guys describe your current state as business as usual, with me having to deal with COVID-19 and of course revenue taking a hit, undergoing restructuring, am I retrenching, am I restructuring my business, or perhaps I'm having to pivot into new markets, new customers, new business models, and potentially a whole new industry altogether, or maybe the very unfortunate outcome of having to shut down. What are your options? Please pick your options, and then we will then share what we've got. So far, we've got 60% of you voted. May the other 40% take a sip of coffee and make sure you're awake on this Friday afternoon, or Friday morning rather, and pick your options so that we can get the right answers to how the poll is going. So gentlemen, as everybody's taking the poll, please think through what kind of models or approaches can business leaders, big or small, medium size and all around, should follow at this time, because this pandemic affects obviously the business. Anthony's already spoken about liquidity and the impact of liquidity, but it also affects people. And these are the people that work in your business and that operate in your business. All right, guys, do we have any results from the polls? Are you able to share where we're looking right now? Right, there we are. We've got our results. And it looks like, look at that, right? 60, business as usual, albeit with potentially lower revenues than before COVID-19. 63% of you, almost 2/3 of you, are saying, yeah, the business is kind of going, but of course I'm experiencing lower revenues. Only 4% of you are thinking about shutting down. I love this group already, you're my favorite people. 16% going through retrenchments and restructuring, makes sense. And I guess number 2 on the scale are those that are trying to pivot into other markets. Wow, that gives us a nice view of the audience, gentlemen, and I'm sure you're going to reference to that as we proceed. Anthony, the man who's been on the ground, having to run this journey, probably making certain turns a few times, maybe 1 or 2 detours, trying to figure it out. Is there an approach? What can you help me with? I'm a businessman. I'm listening to the CEO of Sun International Group. He's probably going through a worse time than me. He's a bigger business than me. He's got different markets to think about. He's listed, he's got shareholders, he's got share price, he's got liquidity. He's got probably, a lot more zeros in the problems and the challenges than me. But he can help me. How would you help me?
Yeah, Tony, I think, Andile, it's really been about creating a team that you can rely on. So I think if you don't have good people in your organization right up front going into this crisis like this, you're going to battle. So I've been very fortunate. I've had very good people around me to help me and deal with this. So getting that team to sort of assess information and what's going on all the time. I think Tony said it, you can't deal with something that's too far out, especially in the very short term, because there's so much information, so much overload, and so much change. It's absolutely right. We haven't seen this before. This is totally new and totally different. So you're not always going to be right. You've got to accept that you're going to be wrong sometimes, and you've got to accept that the decisions are going to need to be made and changed, and you're going to have to accept that you need to say, I got that wrong. And I think that's been probably where we've done quite well to get through to this point in time, is that we've had a good group of people to negotiate, discuss, and plan and plot what we should do next, how we should do it, and how we go about it. So I think really it's teamwork. You can't deal with this on your own. You've got to have the right people around you, and it's got to be a smaller circle than normal, because you need quick answers. You need to be quick to sort of communicate. You need to get the message out quickly. So there's communication platforms. You need to assess the temperature on the ground. We have a great platform called Sun Talk, where our staff can put messages to leadership. You've got to respond to these messages. You've got to see the feeling. You've got to see how they're reading the messages, because what you say and what's interpreted are often two very different things. And you said, well, how do they get that message? And you correct it. So it's a great opportunity if you're hearing and seeing what's happening on the ground, what people are saying, to try and address those messages, address those concerns, because that's the way you keep people together. And when you come through this, everyone's working together and you made the right decisions holistically, because, you know, if you get 80-20 right, you're really doing well.
Okay.
And that's been our aim.
And what about the financiers? What about the bankers? Because you're 100% right. You hit the nail on the head earlier that liquidity will be the biggest issue here. So I run a business, and I may very well still have a compelling business because I had one before COVID-19. But I do have a period of time. There's a storm I need to try and ride here. And what that means is that I need liquidity. I need to be able to cover my costs. I need to continue cooperating. You've had to go and talk to funders. You've had to go and talk to banks. You've had to go and renegotiate covenants and terms. How's that reception from the lenders on the other side, who I guess have to have some compassion for what we're going through as business people?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit complimentary to my bankers and a bit insulting. I think it's what Tony said. You know, you got some boards demanding 10-year forecasts and 5-year, and what's happening here, what's happening there, and I'm worried about what's happening tomorrow. So it's been a bit of, our board's been very good, very supportive, and really work well with us. When I look at the banks, they've been very supportive, very good, but they want 5-year forecasts. They want these predictions. And it is a little bit of, you know, guesswork, and you can do these numbers, and we have had to run them and work with them. They have been supportive as a group. And obviously at the moment, we've got to marry bankers' needs and our shareholder needs. You know, you can't, if my bankers aren't going to support us, it's hard to run to my shareholders and say, listen, I need 1.2 billion, but I'm not sure what the bankers are going to do with that money when we raise it. They might just take it and settle their debts, and then I've still got no liquidity. So trying to make sure you almost have to play the banks and say, I can't go to my shareholders, and the bankers have to understand that. And it is a balance. And I said yesterday, I think it's a balance between banks, shareholders, and employees. You know, we're all in this. If we don't understand that there's some pain in every single, you know, facet, it can't be the banks are going to come in because you're going to breach and take penal interest rates, because then shareholders aren't going to support you. So it's a bit of a balance. We all need to share the pain at the moment.
Wow. Tony Manning, 13 books on management. Do you have a model for me? Is there a structure? Can you give me some guidance? How do I figure this out?
I want to hear it too.
So do I. I've been looking for a long time, actually. What I can suggest is that the model is to recognize that all strategy, all business, all things that happen in organizations is about conversation. And the question is, what is the nature of the conversation that you are having with the people around you? We will include your bankers and your shareholders and so forth, and your customers and so forth. And that conversation can be very powerful. It can make an enormous difference in the fortunes of a company. Strategy ultimately is about a description, a point of view about where and how you're going to compete in the future. So what territories, what industries, what kinds of sectors in those industries and so forth, and how are we going to do it? It really is as simple as that. So it's a kind of, if you think about it, it's a framing device. I frame a picture of the future for this business. And what all businesses have to do is frame that picture as clearly as possible, but recognize as well that maximum clarity now is impossible. So you're going to have to do the best you can, and you're going to have to build flexibility into that conversation so that you are getting information back from the marketplace, back from those other players as quickly as possible, and you're discussing it in a rational way and are able to deal with it sensibly and perhaps creatively at the same time. And that's really what it's all about. In terms of a model, there are questions that have been around forever, which I think need revisiting. So when people say it's business as usual for us, we're going to have lower revenues, we should just carry on as we are, I would say to them, are you sure you've got the basics of your business right? And that might sound a bit glib, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at why companies fail, it is more often, in my view and my experience and so forth, it is more often as a consequence of not doing very fundamental things right, rather than of doing some amazing moonshot thing particularly badly. The companies that succeed build a kind of foundation of basics, if you like. And those practices, those disciplines, they hone and hone and hone. I've had people saying to me, because I wrote a lot about this sort of stuff a few years ago, I've had people saying, oh, those are just tickets to the game. They're not just tickets to the game. They also keep you in the game or get you out of the game. And you neglect them at your peril. And so I have found time and again, talking to CEOs of businesses, when they call me and they say, let's talk about our strategy. And I say to them, what do you think the key issues are? There's some amazing thing. They want more innovation. They want great ideas. They want some, blue sky thinking out of their team, who they tell me are not very creative, and so forth. But when I go and look at the business and I talk to some of their customers and I talk to their people, what I find is that the problem, 9 times out of 10, is not that they don't have a big dream and a bold vision of the future. It's that the tires are flat and there's no gas in the tank. The basics are flawed. So I would just suggest to all of those companies that are saying it's business as usual, or to the others as well, by the way, but to those companies in particular, just go back and review the basics of your business, the fundamental management practices, which are going to enable you to survive and thrive. If you get those right, you'll have a shot. If you don't, you'll have sand in the gears and you'll be pushing this thing uphill the whole way. And it's not going to work. So in terms of models, and there are zillions of frameworks about strategy.
Got you.
One last word I would just suggest is you keep it as simple as possible.
Right.
Because as much as you think that everybody understands your strategy because you think you understand it as well, which often is not the case, because you think that they understand your strategy doesn't mean that they've got a clue about it. Yeah. So let me just leave you with this thought. A study by McKinsey a few years ago of 772 companies around the world showed that about a third of the directors of those companies fully understood what their strategy was about. These are the directors of the company. A study by MIT more recently found that something like 28% of the senior managers who were responsible for driving the strategies in their teams could identify the top 3 priorities for those teams. These are the guys who designed the strategy, and even they can't remember it. And now you expect the guy who's now sitting at home, by the way,
got you,
or out of sight, or he's in some other country.
Okay,
you expect that person to pull the wagon in the same direction. It's not going to happen.
All right, Anthony.
Yeah, I think Tony's hit the nail on the head. I mean, when I took over 3 years ago, I had a strategy that was back to basics. And if you get the basics right, I promise you the customer experience improves. And it's not just what happens in the front, it's what happens in the back office. If you don't have the right ordering of alcohol, the right ordering of the wine, and that, the customer experience is so out of stock. And the poor waiter takes the brunt, and then the service is bad. So the back to basics strategy, doing what you do it well. And make sure you're using your systems appropriately. The next great thing, the next best system is not going to change if you can't do the basics well in your business. So absolutely music to my ears. It's 100% right. You have to have the basics working. And it's a big part of our focus now. We're looking, what is our MVG program? What are the strengths of it? Let's re-emphasize it, build that as the bedrock of our foundation of our marketing plan, and take that forward into the future. So we've had that time to look back and really get the basics right, which is critical.
In fact, linking to that very comment in the theme which you're on about keeping things simple and the approach, Brett Hillier, one of our guests on this webinar, has asked you, Anthony, very specifically, because he's interested to hear what your thoughts are around potentially a paradigm shift that might be needed in the gaming industry. Does this COVID-19 pandemic force or drive us to have to rethink how gaming is done? And linked to that for you, Tony, later, everyone is talking about getting your business digital. Everyone is saying digital. It's all about being on the internet. If you're not on the internet now, you're dead. And COVID-19 has taught us that. What are the shifts? Are there shifts Or after all of this is done, Anthony, we're going to get back to what we used to do before in the hospitality and gaming industry?
Yeah, look, there's definitely shifts. And I mean, look at the gaming industry, you got to look, there's going to be a bigger push for online, and that's critical, but you're never going to quite do it the land-based. So now you've got to try and bring these two, how do you connect them into the future? So you really got to connect and see how we go. So online gaming is illegal. So all of you getting SMSs for online casinos are, if you bet in there, it's illegal. There is no legal online casino in South Africa at the moment, but there is definitely a push because the regulators have seen what's happened, that potentially this is the right way to make sure the industry is not impacted the way it has been, and we can move. So connecting those two and thinking about that shift and that pattern, it's very important so that your systems, your processes, your customers, how do you seamlessly transition them from online to land-based? How do you make sure that experience is seamless, that you can look after them at both ends? Because owning the customer end-to-end is critical. At the same time, linking them to your hospitality resort properties, marketing, incentivizing, building that all as one collective is critical. It is exactly what we're doing. There is a shift. There is a move. We have a sort of potentially an aging customer base, but there's a new type of game coming. There's a new type of younger customers. So our younger customers are still there. In the gaming industry, young guys don't generally have money, but they're important for the future. On the hotel side, it's a very interesting one. We are very much customer. We guest facing. You come there, you got to experience it. So it's very hard when you come and I've got a mask on and I can hardly talk to you, and it's you can't even go to the beach at the moment in Durban, even if you can go stay in the Durban beachfront hotel. Well, you're not allowed on the beach. So what kind of experience is that? But moving forward, let's say we get through that, how does that experience change? And that's the key element. And I think having this lockdown with the changes in terms of the work environment, people working from home more, we're going to push and say, listen, there's more collaboration needed in terms of conferencing, getaways. So the more people you don't have collaborates in the workplace, the better is collaborates potentially on getaways. And we've got to try and capture that market. And there's other things we're doing. For example, we're really looking at proper, decent audio visuals so that you can have a speak in America on a conference in South Africa, Hong Kong, and New York at the same time, ignoring the time zones for a second. But you could have the same speaker talking to everyone and everyone gathered in the locals, as opposed to flying everyone to one destination. So these shifts are coming, and we have to think about how we address them into the future.
Got you. Tony, the physical and the digital?
Well, for many businesses, digital is going to be imperative. It's going to be the only way that they'll be able to operate. But many businesses can't be digital businesses. They're going to have to be people businesses. And people are going to matter enormously in the future as they matter right now. And in too many companies, they are given short shrift. They are not treated, grown, developed, etc., managed on a daily basis the way that's going to get the best out of them and that's going to satisfy them the most either. And that's a reality, and we see it in climate studies, we see it in the performance of people, of businesses, the development of people, etc. So it's a mixture. Anthony might make his properties very attractive to me because I don't need to go and check in with the person at the front desk. I can do it via my cell phone and an electronic lock on the door and so forth. Terrific. But sooner or later, I'm going to encounter people. Somebody's going to bring me a drink. Somebody's going to bring me a sandwich or a meal. How am I going to feel about that? Somebody's got to look after me. And that's going to be really, really important. Even at the moment, you try and deal with call centers in businesses and see the frustration that you endure from companies that have been doing this for ages, where you deal with people who don't know what they're talking about, who can't particularly help you, who aren't particularly helpful anyway, and you're trying to solve a problem. And this is endemic. It's not like it's just in one place or another.
Right.
Once again, what we see is that businesses, by not attending to the fundamentals and thinking about what I as a customer expect from them, by not doing that, businesses are allowing profit and growth and opportunity to fall straight through the cracks. So it's a balancing act. And I think, of course, the shift to digital has been very timely because suddenly we need this stuff desperately. And so many companies are going to be able to reinvent themselves and their offerings in ways that will exploit the digital possibilities. And that's going to be great for them. But everybody cannot do it. And even those that can still will have a human component somewhere.
Anthony, earlier on in our poll, we only had 4% of our guests this morning considering shutting down. And I think that's a conversation that's tough to have because it's not a comfortable one, but it could very well be a reality. You announced 2 days ago that there are some properties that you might have to discontinue. Let's talk about the hard decision of potentially having to make a call that says, strategically, these operations, these products, these services, these divisions, these people, these properties, I must get out the game right now. What did it take for you to make that decision and be convinced that it's the right long-term decision and you're not just doing it as a knee-jerk of the right now?
Yeah. Look, I think in our two properties that we closed, which was Naledi and Carousel, there were quite specific reasons, and I think it had been coming not just COVID. So the decision was imminent. When COVID hit, it became obvious this is the time to actually just close it out. And there was no choice. They were losing money. We had tried very strategic plans to change. And we had engaged with the union just before saying we're about to, and COVID, it was easy. It was an easy decision in the sense of having to keep liquidity, save money, and they were never going to be viable into the future. So in the case of Carousel, they've been impacted by Times Square. It was doomed. We had done various restructures. It is important. There's people, there's jobs at stake. Fortunately, they were pretty small properties, so there's not a massive number of jobs. And we, in the normal circumstances, we'd normally probably find those people work. But with COVID, we're unfortunately in a situation where, well, we've probably got too many people in other places as well. So very difficult to balance the two. But you've got to think about the long-term survival of the group as a whole, as opposed to smaller components. So when smaller components, you've got to give in the towel. Sometimes you'll throw in the towel and say, we need to secure the bigger picture than just look at one little entity. So yeah, that's the key, is think. You've got to think about as I said, liquidity. You've got to think about the longer term when you make these decisions. And if they are potentially viable, you might change. But if they're not, you've got to take the cut. And COVID definitely made it, I don't want to say easier, but it said it has to happen. It made it essential, put it that way.
Right. Tony, how far into the future should I be looking when I'm reviewing my strategy now? Many people on the call may very well now say, okay, I'm going to set up a strategy session, me and my partners or my operation, and we're going to have the conversation. Given the fact that there's a lot we don't know how long it'll take to get a vaccine, we do not know how long we're going to have to wear masks, we do not know how long there'll be social distancing, how far down the line should I be thinking about things? And linked to the question of potentially discontinuing or getting out of businesses, how do I make sure I'm not making the wrong decision? How do I make sure I'm not overreacting?
The simple answer to the first part of the question is about 5 minutes. Because the future is, we talk about this fog of war that we are in, and that's really what we are in. We are totally blindsided by what is happening and mystified about what is likely to happen. Nobody knows. I was listening to Bill Gates this morning talking about vaccines and the potential for these things to resolve the problem. And one of the points that he made was when a vaccine arrives, to make it effective and to really put a stop to this COVID-19 problem, you've got to vaccinate everybody on the planet. Otherwise, you or somebody else is going to walk into my office and infect me. Somebody will come from China to America again and infect Americans. That, he says, could take 5 years. So we've got a long period ahead of us of really bad growth, with consequences being created at the moment, which are going to be dire for business. We have no concept at the moment of how serious the unemployment, the furloughs, the salary cuts, all these other things are going to be in terms of consumer behavior tomorrow. So the answer is as short as possible in terms of your strategy. For the last decade, I've been telling companies to think in terms of 30-day chunks, because that's a kind of reasonable time to plan for and to get something done and to learn from it, and to see who in your business is performing and who is not, what strategy is working, what's not, what else can we do from here. And I think that's got to become a way of life in every business, is that you operate in these tight time chunks. You gather as much information as you can about the future, but you also recognize that you are bound to be wrong. So at the moment, one of the dilemmas in marketing, as you'll know, is should I be spending money on advertising? The advertising industry for many years has said we've got abundant proof that advertising pays, and the best time to advertise is when times are lousy, because that'll get you out ahead of the competition, you'll build a brand, you'll be ready to go, etc. But it can also put you out of business. There's a long article recently by Keith Weed, who was the chief marketing officer at Unilever for many years, very, very successful, highly regarded man, talking about exactly this notion of spending in a downturn. It might be a really great investment, but you don't know, because to predict the consumer behavior of the future with the best will in the world is impossible. I was at Coca-Cola when they launched New Coke, having conducted hundreds of thousands of taste tests to be sure that when they came onto the market with this replacement for the old Coke to fight Pepsi Cola, that they had a brand that would win. It lasted for about 6 months. They got it completely wrong. There were a whole bunch of reasons, but they got it completely wrong. And consumer pressure ultimately forced them to reverse their decision. The marketing literature is full of examples of forecasts and projections about how customers would behave in the future, and you do not know until they walk into the shop and they put the money in your hand. It's as simple as that. Take an example which is obviously close to Anthony's heart, which is restaurants. Are people going to gallop back into restaurants? Well, the assumption is yes, and you see a lot of stuff on social media where people who comment are saying, God, I can't wait to get back. I'm looking forward to my steak, etc. Okay, so you go back to a restaurant. You're sitting 10 feet apart from your neighbors, separated from them by plexiglass screens, served by a waiter in a hazmat suit who looks like he's going to the moon, trying to slurp your glass of wine through the side of your mask or suck it through a straw, trying to get the steak into your mouth somehow. Are you going to go back? The answer is we don't know. And we won't find out until you open the restaurant, provide an experience, test it, and see what customers actually do, not what they say they are going to do.
Right.
Because it's very easy. And at the moment, one of the dangers for us as businesses is, there are two things that I think are problematic for business. And I should mention them here because they affect much of the rest of this kind of debate. The one is bullshit. And it's quite interesting. I've been warning companies about this for some time, saying just be careful of the bullshit that occurs in your own organization when you're being assured by the marketing folk that no, sales are going to go up next month. Well, how do you know that? And they give you 10 reasons. Or, at the end of the year, we always have a spike. Why is that? Well, we always have, and we're going to in the future. And so you get these tales which purport to be the truth, but which are absolutely nonsense. So that's one of the things. And it's interesting, in the last 6 months, there have been a number of academic articles by very prominent experts about exactly this plague in organizations, where your own team, for whatever reason, are misleading you as a group, as a chief executive, and so forth. It's very serious. And the second aspect is one that Anthony raised, and I've touched on it, which is the issue of guesswork. So there are two things that pervade organizations. The one is bullshit, and the other one is guesswork. And we need to understand that. And we need to fight those things, because otherwise we're going to make rapid decisions which turn out to be completely flawed. They're going to get us into trouble. This just requires, seriously, the best we can do is have an ongoing, very inclusive, very hard, very robust conversation. Test every assumption, check everything on the ground in practice. That is the best we can do.
Lovely stuff. All right. No BS and no guesswork. Yes, those are the two things. BS and guesswork.
And smokes.
And spikes that you don't understand where they come from. Tony, you were saying?
This little book is it. This is a book called On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt, who's a professor emeritus of philosophy at Princeton University.
Okay.
Great treatise on what this thing is all about.
All right, I'm going to check that out. Let me just go back to Anthony. One of the things that you have some benefit for is that you're a listed company. And even though it's not an easy decision to make, you do have the ability to go to the markets when you need liquidity, like you are now with the rights issue. Johan Stradom asks a question here from the perspective of SMMEs. So these are small and medium-sized businesses. And whether you have any advice for them around this liquidity issue. And Johan makes the point that, you know, even apart from COVID-19, as an SME, they had 4 to 6 months of working capital. Now, after lockdown, that's down to 2 to 3 months. What kind of advice do you have for the small business guys that may not be able to go to shareholders and ask that kind of question that says, help me out with some liquidity here?
Yeah, look, it's extremely difficult. I mean, you know, SMMEs depend on big business and big business need SMMEs. So we kind of have got a symbiotic relationship. But if you look at from government support, it's all been for SMMEs and not big business. Now, even that support's not really enough for the SMMEs, to be honest. So I think the most important thing, if you're going to manage your liquidity, and one of the threats that the small guys have when they come back is their creditors are going to say, I want cash, you know, or their suppliers, I want cash, I'm not going to extend credit. So it's so important to remain close to them so that they will give you that credit. If you can't pay, make sure they're clear of what the situation is when they can get it. Because if you start trying to lie to them, manipulate them, you won't get that working capital, that ability to get credit from them for 30 days. So you can actually buy the stock for the restaurant. You can have it stocked when you actually start to open again, and then you can sell, and then you get your cash, and then you can set your creditors. So if you don't look after sort of your working capital, that ability, those people that support you, and that support system, that's probably going to be where you fail. Because I understand, you know, we would have thought, you know, 3 months of closure, and I've always said the closure period is not a problem. It's how long it takes us to ramp up is the bigger issue. So yeah. Yes, we've lost R1 billion or billion and whatever in terms of profits and costs we've got to pay out. But how much longer is it going to take for me to be cash positive? And I think the same for the smaller guys. How much longer? How do you work with the bigger guys? Because we can't have all our costs suddenly rushing back when we can open, when we're operating at 50% capacity. So managing your business to meet the people you serve is critical. You need to measure and understand that the future is different, and particularly the ramp-up period. How long? So how do I restructure my business to make sure I'm not overstaffed, you know, it's not business as usual. Things have changed. You've got to look at it, and you've got to look at the impact on your customers to make sure you can address those concerns.
100%. Tony, question here from Annabelle Bigger about competition. Annabelle asked, do more competitors expand the market? As I had first mover advantage 2 years ago, and now 5 new competitors have emerged this year. How do I handle competitors in this environment?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that a sustainable advantage is today pretty much nonsense for any business in any sector. Because, and the reasons are simple. I have the same information about the world as you do within a microsecond. So I hire the same consultants, I read the same books, I go to the same conferences, I talk to the same industry peers, I talk to the same regulators, and I know that stuff like you know that stuff. And I can, by the way, I can decode your strategy in about 5 seconds as well. And managers tend to keep this thing secret because it's, you know, it's absolutely unique and it gives us an advantage. Yeah. That's not the case. I can decode your strategy very quickly because I know there are certain things you will have to do as a business to be successful. There are key factors of success. And if you violate them, you can't play to win. So that's the first thing, is to recognize the extreme unsustainability of strategy today. And the second thing to think about is that as more competitors come into a marketplace,
right,
effectively what they all help you do is train the customer in their expectations, in how they deal with you, in what they pay for the service, and so forth.
Right.
And everybody collectively moves that market along. Now, obviously, the intention must be to stand out in the marketplace. That is clear. So we talk today about disruption as if it's a novel idea and, we must be the disruptor, etc. Disruption has always been a goal of strategy. You want to gain the high ground.
Okay.
The question is, how do you do that? What is absolutely clear today, and it's been coming for a long time in many sectors.
Yeah.
What is clear today is that you have to define value in a way that the customer will now appreciate it. And
Tony, let's leave it there for now, brother. Let's leave it there. I think that's a poignant place to leave it. We've got 4 minutes left. So the important thing is, how do you define value? How do you define value for your customers so that you continue a sustainable competitive advantage? Let's move on to our next poll before we wrap up. Please, guys, if you don't mind putting up our final poll. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is asking you, how has your outlook for your business changed after attending this webinar? How has your outlook for your business changed after attending this webinar? Is it
got to be more positive?
Is it less positive? I hope that the two Tonys have made you a little bit more positive, but let's hear your honest opinion. Unchanged, more positive, or less positive? And as we get the results of the poll, I hope Alita Curry is ready from 3 Stick Men. She is, of course, ready for our digital representation of the conversations that we've been having for the past hour or so. And she'll share with you a little memorabilia that you can carry along. Here is our results. More positive, 79%. Well done, Anthony and Tony. You've given some realistic, painful points, I'm pretty sure, for many of us. 18% are unchanged and only 3% are less positive. I think that is a positive place to be indeed. Lita, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andile. Good morning, everyone. As the panelists were talking about their experiences, I've been capturing a combination of words and pictures to basically summarize what we've learned from this conversation. Andile started saying, what measures can you adopt as a business owner or running a company to make sure that your business thrives? And it's really around accessing those blueprints that Allan Gray wants to make available to you. The first question was, looking back in the last 3 months, Sun International says they had just turned the corner when lockdown happened. And then lockdown got extended. Lots of lobbying, lots of issues around health and safety that they had to focus on. And they really had to do a deep dive into what is their costing, what do their customers need from them? How do they pay salaries? Because they had to pay, or they had to cut salaries by 40%. And Anthony said liquidity is absolutely paramount. The problem is you can't look too far into the future because the information is not available. You really can just focus on information that you have now, and you have to be flexible in the moment. You spoke about the different scenarios that they had a look at, and you said how important it was to keep your people informed. Then the question was, what has been the impact of the pandemic? And Tony said to us, the best way, a practical approach is the best way. Use your common sense. There's no real long-term view at the moment. You have to steer the ship only for today. And I thought it was really interesting. He said, leaders really is in the business of giving people hope. And that's what we're here for. It has never happened to us before, the whole situation that we're finding ourselves in. And if anyone tells you that they've got the answer, it's probably not true. There's no thing as a 5-year plan anymore. We have to deal with this reality at the time that it happens. Grit will really get us through. And Tony mentioned that it's critical to have that conversation. It's in the conversation that the value will be had. So we spoke about the fact, I'm going to go through to the left, the question was around the business models, and we had a poll with 63% of you saying business is carrying on as usual, but we're anticipating lower income and changes in our business model. And then Anthony spoke about the fact that it's critical to have a good team. If you want to be successful, you have to have a strong team around you, and you have to accept that sometimes you might be wrong because we don't always have the answers. And he reiterated again how critical it is to get the message out there to your employees, to your shareholders. That's absolutely important. That's absolutely critical. The question was asked around how the banks have been supportive, and the problem that he mentioned was they have been supportive, but they really needed that long-term focus, which at the moment we can't give because we don't know what it is. It's really around getting that balance right between the banks, your shareholders, and your employees. And then Tony mentioned the fact that it's critical to get that the basics of your business right. It's not the ticket to the game, it's the ticket that will keep you in the game, keep the tires pumped, keep the gas in the tank. Frame the picture as clearly as you can see now. What I thought was really interesting is your strategy crystal clear to yourself, to the rest of the people who work with you, for your employees, for your shareholders, your stakeholders? Can they explain what your strategy is in 20 words or less? Anthony spoke to us about the shift in his business to younger customers in gaming. They're investigating a digital shift. But Tony iterated how important it is that the people conversation and the people contact is still there. It's not practical for everyone to move to a digital platform. You really have to ask yourself, what does my customer expect from me? Deciding what to close down, Anthony said, look at the bigger picture, what is good for the business. And you really can only look at 30-day chunks. Look into the future is 5 minutes long and then it changes. If we're looking or we're hoping for a vaccine will only really solve this problem in 5 years. At the moment, we don't know what consumers will do. We cannot rely on what they say they will do. And I had to, of course, bring in the bull over there. Careful for this stuff in your company. None of that and none of the guesswork, because we tell ourselves lies that we believe all the time. I've also made a note of Harry Frankfurt's book, which I'm definitely going to check out. And advice for small, medium businesses: keep close to your working capital, keep close to your creditors, restructure where it makes sense. Remember that your strategy alone won't make you successful. The goal of your strategy is really to disrupt the business and finally define the value for your customer. And that is the main takeout. We will send this picture through to you. You're welcome to use it and to communicate it. Andile, over to you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Lita, for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our webinar. I want to thank Anthony. I want to thank Tony for joining us this morning. And I thank all of you guys. I'm told we're well into the thousands that have joined us this morning. Please take a few minutes to complete the feedback that's going to pop up, because of course you registered for today's webinar and we've already told you the 10-part series. Part 2 takes place on the 17th of July. You do not want to miss it. We will be focusing on financing your business beyond the relief of funding. What does it take for you to raise the right liquidity, which is a big focus even today as a key element of what we need to do to make sure our businesses survive. So 17th July at 10 o'clock, we'll be having the next webinar. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me as my guest today. You guys were great. Ladies and gentlemen out there, thank you for being part of our session. We will catch you again on the 17th of July. May you have a productive Friday, but just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think you can pour a glass of wine. Take care.